All right, so it's been a pretty active day for the Conservative Party of Canada. They've had to turf two candidates already. One guy who pees in coffee cups from time to time, though that does not represent who he is professionally. That's Jerry
someone else who
Vance.
appeared on Flashpoint. That's just unacceptable. And this other guy in Toronto who was an actor and did other weird things in his spare time, including these crank calls that he put on YouTube that were strange enough, I guess, offensive enough to get him punted as a candidate, too.
Now, the headache continues to grow for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Not only does he have to fend off some pretty strong campaigning by Thomas Mulcair and some slightly less strong campaigning by Justin Trudeau, but now there are even more groups entering the fray, one of which is UNIFOR. It shouldn't surprise you that the largest union in the country might not want Stephen Harper to be reelected. And indeed they don't. So we're going to bring Jerry Dias into the conversation now, president of UNIFOR. And, sir, to you, happy Labor Day today.
Well, thank you very much. It's a fantastic day here.
All right, I bet it is. Okay, so as I understand, your union, other unions, today is also kind of a kickoff of an organized campaign to try to ensure the Conservatives are defeated.
Well, there is no question he will not be getting a lot of support from the labor movement. Facts are, the economy is in the worst shape it's been in since the Second World War. There's more young people unemployed today than when he came to power 9 years ago. Raises retirement to 67 from 65. Well, every premier across the country says to raise CPP. So there's just a whole host of things that this government has done, yet alone, I'm not even going to talk about the scandals. I won't even talk about the disaster that's occurred for him today.
Yeah, we've covered that enough this morning, I think, and I think people are more interested in some of the economic arguments here as well. And I want to get detailed on the campaign that UNIFOR is launching here with some of your counterparts across the land. But to the question about jobs, certainly the economy should be the most important issue in this election. I think it's the one that's at the forefront of most people's minds when they carry their ballot to the box. And Stephen Harper's jobs record is either one of the best it's been, or it's the worst since the Second World War, as you put it. Is the problem that it's not the right kinds of jobs that are being created, Jerry?
Well, 80% of all jobs that have been created in the last 6 years are non-standard, precarious, part-time. So clearly you can't develop a good middle class with precarious jobs. You don't have enough tax base coming in because people just aren't making enough money. So if you take a real good look at his record, they talk about creating 1.2 million jobs. Well, the facts are is that with immigration and with people reaching working age, you needed over 3 million jobs just for everybody to have an opportunity. So that is a real problem. Last year we created 130,000 jobs in Canada, of which 80% were part-time. And in the United States, they created 2 million full-time jobs. So our economy is going in opposite directions, and you can't lose over 400,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs as a result of poor policies and expect that somehow Canadians are going to be better off. Nobody's buying it.
Oh, wait, well, hang on a second. So you're advocating then that Stephen Harper could have done more, that the government needs to do more to create jobs. You're talking about a very activist, interventionist approach to the economy.
If you take a look at the successful economies around the world... Well,
you mentioned the U.S.
Well, I'll take a look at the U.S., take a look at Germany, take a look at a whole host of nations that are doing much better off than us. They are governments that have a plan. They're governments that say, hey, we want high-tech, good-paying manufacturing jobs, and they play a role in stimulating those types of jobs. This government doesn't do any of that.
How do you define manufacturing job?
Well, whether or not it's auto, could be aerospace, basically anything that we make that we hopefully would be exporting. So there's a whole host of jobs, whether or not it's auto parts. I can walk right through the whole list. But we don't build anything here. We take everything out of the ground and we ship it overseas to have it processed. So we really have gotten away from being a nation that really builds stuff and sells finished products.
Right, but do you define it the same way that Stats Canada defines a manufacturing job?
Yes. You'll have the bottom line is we don't make anything here, and that's the problem.
Right, but people who did work in manufacturing, those jobs where you make stuff, who were able to transition out of those jobs into engineering jobs or design jobs or service jobs, for example, are no longer classified as manufacturing jobs, and that doesn't necessarily mean that a person is unemployed. It does mean that a job is lost, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that person has gone starving.
Oh, I beg to differ. The facts are is that most of the good-paying manufacturing jobs, yes, some people may have gone into other industries, but the facts are is the majority of those workers lost good-paying jobs and ended up in
hang on a second. I'm
jobs.
Confused because Stats Canada told us last week that we exported $7.56 billion worth of motor vehicle parts compared to just $7.3 billion in energy exports. We export more auto parts than we do oil. Auto exports are up 11% compared to the year before.
I think that you will find that our trade deficit on auto is the worst it's ever been, whether or not it's auto parts, automobiles. If you start to walk through the whole system, we are having our lunch handed to us by Mexico because they have an auto strategy and we don't. So
what's Mexico's auto strategy?
We've got a $10 billion deficit just with Mexico alone. About 15 years ago, we had about a $15 billion trade surplus. Now we've got about a $20 to $25 billion trade deficit. So we are absolutely not heading in the right direction.
What's Mexico's strategy?
Their government participates. Their government attracts good-paying manufacturing jobs. They'll offer incentives. They'll do a whole host of things because they understand that for every dollar that they hand out an incentive, they're going to get 10 back. They know that it's that it's a long-term strategy for creating decent-paying jobs.
Those good-paying, decent-paying jobs, are they decent-paying jobs in Mexico or in Canada?
No, they're decent-paying jobs in Canada. An auto worker in Mexico gets paid $3 an hour all in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good-paying job in Mexico, not in Canada.
No, of course. It's not even a great-paying job in Mexico, I would suggest, but they're finding a way to put people to work.
Okay.
By trying to stimulate the economy, but are they paying well? The answer is no.
So is that the key then to creating manufacturing jobs, is to undercut Mexico?
No, of course not. You could never undercut Mexico. I mean, in Canada, our minimum wage is 3-4 times that. You couldn't survive here on $3 an hour all in. It would be complete mass chaos, economic chaos.
Jerry, what do you think is going to change? Let's say you're successful in this campaign. You're going to get the Conservatives voted out of office. Presumably, I don't know, maybe you don't care whether it's the New Democrats or Liberals. Maybe you have a preference. I don't know. What would change, do you think, in that sense?
Well, I think, first of all, you need a government that really is dedicated to putting people to work. They're dedicated about stimulating the economy, playing a proactive role in putting people to work. Their whole argument of we're just going to give the corporations tax cuts and somehow we're going to benefit from the trickle-down effect. It hasn't worked for us, so that's pretty clear. So this whole argument about letting the business community do whatever they want and we're going to take a hands-off approach, that somehow that's the key to economic stability and success. It's not working, and it hasn't worked in 10 years.
It seems that the opposite approach, then, is to increase corporate taxes and payroll taxes as well. That's one thing that the Prime Minister is quite adamant about, is that these other options for you, Justin Trudeau and Thomas Mulcair, will increase corporate taxes and or increase payroll taxes. Do you feel that that's where the solution to creating more jobs lies, is in tax increases?
No. Well, first of all, I think that corporations should pay their fair share of taxes, just like everybody else. So for many corporations to have complete holidays on the premise that somehow it's going to create jobs, the opposite has proven to be true. So I think everybody has to pay their fair share of taxes. And this whole argument that somehow eliminating all of these corporate taxes and they're all going to come here, well, it hasn't worked. We've got the lowest corporate tax base out of all the G7 nations, and it's not working. So there has to be something else besides just saying, hey, listen, I'm going to give everybody tax breaks, corporate tax breaks, and somehow they're going to create jobs. It's not working, and it hasn't worked.
Okay. So when the government does something like Stephen Harper announced that if he was reelected, he would extend the mining and exploration tax credit, which is about $60 million a year, is that good news or bad news for the Ontario Mining Association?
No, I'm sure it's good news for the Ontario Mining Association, but I would suggest to you that companies that are doing incredibly well should pay their fair share.
Would that include like Ford or GM? It seems odd to me that we want companies like Ford and GM to pay more in corporate taxes, but then we want to give them more money so that they'll keep their plants here. So we're taking it out of one pocket and giving it right back to them.
No, first of all, you got to get them here in the first place. So you're going to have some sort of a national auto strategy that attracts people to come to invest in this country in the first place. So you have to get them inside the walls. Once you get people inside the walls, then the question becomes, what's a fair system? I mean, you're not finding Ford, GM, or Chrysler arguing about their tax that they pay. I'm not hearing that through any conversations I'm having with them.
But GM's a big company. They earned almost $3 billion in profit last year. So when you talk about companies paying their fair share, that would include companies like GM, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
So they should pay more in corporate taxes, but then government should provide them more incentive to stay here.
GM is already here. The question becomes, how do we, let's use Oshawa as an example that's in desperate need of a product. If, in fact, GM does not put more products in Oshawa, Oshawa becomes a ghost town. That affects everybody. That'll affect about 5,000 direct jobs, but another 50,000 jobs that are tied into it. Take 55,000 jobs out of the Ontario economy, and you're looking at a $2 billion hit right off the bat.
So how does raising taxes on GM help?
The question becomes, what is a fair taxation rate for companies? Do you think that they should not pay their fair share just like everybody else? I think a fair taxation rate should be tied into their overall business plan. What is it that they're extracting? What is it that they're benefiting? What is it that they're earning? They should pay taxes on that.
Right. I agree with you, and I think that GM, General Motors, which is an international company, has every right to say, Jerry, you're correct. A fair income tax rate should not be set at 15%. It should be 17%. We choose not to pay it in this country. We're going to go somewhere else.
Well, I mean, ultimately, corporations are going to make decisions. Whether or not it's tied into profitability, whether or not, first of all, you're finding that they're doing very well in their Canadian operations. The question becomes, what's fair? And how do you attract good-paying jobs in the first place? All I'm saying to you is that this whole argument, this non-interventionist argument, that somehow I'm just going to lower taxes, I'm going to have the lowest taxation, corporate taxation, out of any G7 nation, and that somehow that's going to create the jobs. It's not working. It hasn't worked. The numbers say that it's not, so there has to be a better strategy.
But Jared, that's
all I'm suggesting.
That's not the entire argument, though, because you leave out the fact that there's an automotive innovation fund, that there was a significant bailout back.
But the automotive fund is a disaster. The automotive fund is a repayable, taxable loan. So the reason that the fund is there is because nobody's using it. Companies aren't touching it because it's not worth their while. It's not worth the red tape. It's not a grant system. It's a system where they even pay taxes on the money that they get as a repayable loan.
That's a loan,
So it doesn't attract anybody. It's a joke. Nobody's touching it. That's why they have the fund, is because you notice the fund isn't going down. It's because nobody's using it.
I don't disagree with you, but it just stands to me to reason that if General Motors has to decide where they're going to set up a plant, and they can either pay, $27 an hour in Canada or $3 an hour in Mexico, they're not dummies. They're going to get the same car, the same product.
It all depends on what we're going to do as a nation. How do we can certainly compete as it relates to quality, productivity, all of those other things. GM is very successful here in sales as it relates to their Canadian operations, so there has to be a quid pro quo.
Okay.
So obviously they want to sell in Canada. They don't have the same freight as if they're shipping stuff from Mexico, but you're right. Canadians will never compete on wages with a Mexican worker, whether or not you're in the broadcast industry or whether or not you're building cars. We'll never be able to compete with what they've got in Mexico.
I don't habla español, so I don't know if I can get that radio gig in Mexico. Hey, Jerry, it's always really fun to talk to you, but and in so doing these fun conversations, we often get a little bit sidetracked. And one question that's burning on me about this campaign, this anti-Harper campaign, if you let me describe it as such, is it a mobilize the vote campaign? Are you going into communities and telling UNIFOR members, get out there, vote for this particular candidate, or how does it manifest itself?
Well, there's no question. We're going to spend a lot of time with our members on what the key issues are. The fact that Harper has failed to renegotiate the health care accord, taking $36 billion out of it. All of the real important issues to working class people. So we're going to give our members the information, and they're going to make their own minds. But it's very clear that we are preoccupied with making sure that we get rid of the worst government we've had here economically since the Second World War. So we're preoccupied with that. So we'll provide our members the proper information, and they're going to make up their own minds.
All right. Jerry, thanks so much for joining us here today. Appreciate this.
Have a good day.
All right.
Thank
Jerry
you.
Dias is president of UNIFOR, Canada's biggest union, and they're leading the charge here. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back with some final thoughts.
Roger Kincaid and Rob Breckenridge.